welcome everyone to this session on the new gives and takes in a software tester's role. So when I was initially invited for this session and I was thinking about, okay, what do I take to the audience out here, to the audience on the table, I said, hey, this is probably going to be an interesting topic, a topic which is the need of the day as well, which also really aligns with the conference's main theme, crossing the chasm. How do we really move from a world of assurance to a world of confirmation? And so here I am to talk on this topic. I know it's a post-lunch session, so we'll try and make it as engaging as possible and hopefully leave a few minutes for Q&A as well at the end. So overall, if you see in terms of the flow, I'm going to touch upon three main topics. I'm going to start talking about where quality is as of today. How is the playing field really changing? And most of it triggered by the changes in the product development space itself, and how quality is keeping pace with those changes happening. So that will be like one section. The next one, I'll talk about the gives and takes in the software tester's role. And we'll wrap it up saying, what does it really take for us to thrive in this discipline? Surviving is important. Yes, we need to survive in any discipline. But what do we do to really thrive? Isn't thriving elegant compared to surviving, which is just important? So that's the whole flow. We'll focus it on these three main sections. So with this, as we start off, I'll just do some level setting with an ad campaign out here. So in terms of spotting the difference, you do see it's the same sequence of images placed both ways. It's just the order in which you actually get to read. So take, for instance, this is an ad campaign that's being built for a soft drink, which is going to be launched globally. So I first start off with markets which read left to right. I say, yes, I'm running in a desert, I'm exhausted, I'm going to drink cola, and I'm rejuvenated, going to start running again. So let's take it to a market which reads right to left. Unless it's an anti-campaign for cola, the message is going to completely fail. Where I'm running, I'm all excited, I drink cola, I drop dead. That's the message we're going to send across. So I think what's important here for us is the global forces that are coming into play. I'm not going to be able to just think along my silos, which I probably did like a decade back, saying let me start off with one market and then think about the other markets. We as testers are obviously being forced to think of the global forces at play. And I think what's happening is most of these are being triggered by the changes in the product development space itself. So firstly, if you see there, we've been hearing this message over the last 2 days from multiple speakers saying, quality is really shifting left. So what's really welcoming for us to see is there is a collective ownership for quality that's coming in. Yes, if something goes wrong, it's the test's neck that's still out in the line saying, hey, what really happened? What went wrong? But what's heartening to see is everyone is stepping in. The developer is coming in, the build engineer is coming in, the ops is coming in saying, how can I really help take on quality in my own scope of operations? So that's a very positive change that we should all be very happy about and see how we can really leverage this change, how we can really build on this change to help the entire team own quality. That's one very important thing happening. Second thing is around domain. Even until a few years back, a tester could come in and say, I really understand test strategy, I understand test automation, test planning, so give me any product and I'd be able to test. I'm not saying that is untrue as of today, that is still possible to a large extent, but I think the need for understanding the domain knowledge is becoming even more important. The convergence of your vertical domain knowledge and your horizontal testing disciplinary knowledge is what is becoming very important. Let me understand what the workflows are, what are the mandates that are coming in, what are the compliances. So how can I take this value back to my team with the convergence of the horizontal as well as the vertical. The third is in terms of the competition, understanding what competition has got to offer in the marketplace. Yes, you may say, hey, aren't there the business teams, aren't there the marketing teams, aren't there teams that are going to be chartered to do this competitive analysis? Yes, they are there. But as a tester, I take back to my team. And finally, around thinking beyond the bounds, thinking globally, the campaign that we just saw, the devices that the end user operates your product on, the platforms that they use, the locales. So you're having to think sort of holistically as opposed to just that silo view, which would have worked a few years back. So in line with this, I want to take a quick case study of Facebook. Any Facebook employees out here? If so, no offense. And the other question here is, are there any non-users of Facebook in this room at all? Okay, 1, 2. Interestingly enough, okay, we have about 5 or 6 out here. Interestingly enough, there are these few bugs in Facebook which were reported a few months back, where although you may be non-users, your information may actually been saved by Facebook through some shape or form. There's this feature called shadow profiles. I'm not sure how many of us know about it. At least I didn't know about it until I really got to read about this particular bug. So apparently in its disclaimer statement, Facebook mentions deep within that it can collect information from you from multiple sources and keep it offline in sort of a shadow database. That's why it's called a shadow profiles. And there's this tool, there's this feature called download your information, where I as a user of Facebook can go in and download my information. It's supposed to give me my profile information, a bunch of information basically. So what had happened, Facebook had collected all these details, kept it in its shadow profiles, and people who used this download your information tool around the June-July time frame, they were actually being hit by this bug. They began to see information which they had not actually explicitly given to Facebook. And what had happened was this shadow profiles information, which was not supposed to be leaked as part of this download your information, there was a bug there. And because of which, about 6 million users were affected. And they were really angered, saying, okay, we may have signed it somewhere deep within in our disclaimer statement. So firstly, we did not know you were collecting this information. And secondly, because of this bug, there is all this open information out there right now. So this really, got me intrigued. I'm sorry if this color is really bright. As I was putting through the slides, it didn't look this bright to me. So this really got me intrigued because I've heard from multiple sources as well that Facebook does not have testers. So I was like, okay, how do they go about doing testing if they do not have testers? There's this very interesting blog that an ex-Facebook employee had written. He had written this around Jan of last year, Jan of 2012. He was there for 4 years as an engineer out there. And he writes about how quality happens at Facebook and why they do not have a formal QA team. So he says, firstly, they have a lot of automation code. And the automation code is actually measured by the lines of code and not really based on the scope or the coverage itself. Okay? Then they have employees of Facebook test it and provide feedback. They have ex-employees have privileged channels through which they report bugs. They monitor end-user reports, logs, and see what errors end users are facing. They have something called bug bounty programs. So if you will, it's a very niche crowdsourced testing through which they invite end users to test and provide feedback. So as I was reading through this, I was like, okay, I'm not denying the power of any of these programs, but are these supplemental techniques to bring in quality, or are these really standalone techniques through which you want to bring in quality? That was my big question. And the reason he says they don't have a formal QA team, according to them, having a formal QA team brings down the fun element at Facebook. That's what he says. And he says it's a social networking application, so it's not as critical as a banking application or a health sciences software. And he also says the stickiness element for Facebook is very high. Even if there are quality issues, people will continue to use Facebook. Now, all of these were big question marks for me when I read them. And again, I say, this was as of January 2012. And then this year, we had that shadow profiles bug that I just talked about. What was positive, at least slightly positive for me to further read was, in August, Facebook came out with a news release saying we are going to put our brakes on the hacker style of development that we've had so far. We are beginning to focus more on quality. And even if that means slightly slowing down our releases, we are beginning to focus more on quality, and that is showing our maturation as a company. So finally, it's great to see that news. And what I'm trying to get away with this is, yes, quality's playing fields are changing with the changes in the product development space. But if at all any, its importance is only further going up. It's moving upstream. It's shifting left, as several of us have talked about out here, where collectively as a team, people are coming in. Yes, with Agile, we know time to market is important, the cost factor is important, resources are constrained, but as testers, we are continuing to hold that baton to make sure quality is not compromised. And what does it mean? I think it's time for a change for us right now. Really time for a change for us to revisit what we are doing, what we have been doing, and see if this is what is going to work for us the next 3 to 5 years down the line, or are there going to be changes in this role, trying to be more of an empowerer of quality rather than just an execution person on the team. So James Bach, I'm sure several of us here have heard of James Bach, a very popular, well-known consultant speaker on quality topics in the US, and for that matter, globally. He talks about 7 different kinds of testers. And he's not saying any one particular kind of tester is right or wrong. He's also not saying you have to contain yourself into just one particular category. He's saying, I think it's time for us now to think about what kind of a tester I am, and really see if this kind of testing is enough for my domain, for my marketplace, or is it time for me to grow into other roles as well? So his 7 kinds of testers, he talks about an administrative tester, a person who is very process oriented, who is very methodical. I'm not saying the person is totally documentation driven, but at least has a mental map saying this is how I'm going to execute things. Is very process oriented, at least mentally. Then we have the technical tester. A tester who's very driven by tools, frameworks, automation code. So how am I going to enhance my productivity, bring in more repeatability in my testing efforts? So person who really focuses from a technical standpoint. A person who is an analytical tester, who really thinks along, statistically, what can I do with my results? How can I take this back with my team? How can I disseminate this information back with my team? So who's thinking very model-driven, very analytically. A 4th category, which is a social tester. I really want to include my entire team in the testing process. How can I pair up with my developer? How can I pair up with my build engineer, with my program manager? How can I bring everyone involved into my testing effort? That's the social tester. A developer tester, here the person is actually a developer, but who's trying to contribute to the quality efforts, to the testing efforts, be it say through unit tests, test-driven development, or taking on some BVTs, whatever the case may be. Then a usability person, someone who really comes in from an end user standpoint, tests your product, provide feedback. And an empathetic tester. Empathetic tester, a person who really thinks from an end user standpoint. Is this really going to make sense for my end user? How are they going to receive this? Any particular change I make, how is it going to impact them? So really trying to think from an end user standpoint. So when I saw this, the first thing for me was, okay, which categories do I really belong to? And I'm sure most of you would have tried to map to, saying, hey, which categories do I really belong to? So again, there is nothing right or wrong about any particular category, but I think now is that time for us to see, saying, if I belong to 3 categories, is this enough for my domain, for my product? Or do I have to branch into these other categories too, to be able to make that difference, both in my career as well as for my product? So which is striking the right balance. Yes, we are always hard pressed for time. We're always working on products where the release should have been yesterday. Who has the bandwidth on hand? But I think this is where a smart approach is really going to help. How do we strike that balance? Are there things I'm doing today which I can give off? I don't want to be doing these. These are not going to bring in value to me, or these are better handled by someone else. And instead, are there things I can take on my plate? I think that's the thing about the give and the take that we're going to talk about in the next section. So when we talk about the gives and takes, I really look at the gives from 2 angles. One, gives in terms of what can I give away completely from my plate. I don't want any of my other team members also taking on these tasks. The second category being, what are the gives I can give to another team member? I can empower them do this better, and instead I can take on some other thing on my plate. So those are the 2 headings of the gives. So the first heading of give, where what can I give away totally off my plate? Firstly, I would say a detailed documentation approach. If that is something we're doing as of today, I think now is the time for us to give that away. I'll take my own example here. A few years back in my previous company, it was a very large ISV, a V1 product. We were putting together a test strategy. I was personally involved in creating that test strategy. We took about a month and a half to put it together, and we were super proud at the end of it. Oh wow, it's a 100+ pager test strategy. And sure enough, yes, it was helpful to bootstrap the effort. But really looking back, how much of it did we use, over a period of time? Did it really make sense? Or should we have sort of gotten the effort started, the quality effort itself started sooner than later? And if I don't know how many of you were sitting on Nandan's session this morning, another colleague of mine from QA Infotech, he talked about augmented reality, things that are coming in where you're going to be able to talk to systems to be able to help with your testing efforts, saying, oh, thumbs up for a test pass and the system will understand it, thumbs down for the system to understand it as a failure. So I think technology is also moving at that pace to help us sort of do away with detailed documentation. Again, I'm not propagating anti-documentation approach, but revisit what we're doing as of today to see if there are things that we can give away. Secondly, similarly, a pure script-based testing approach, whether manual, whether automated. If we are following a complete script-based approach, even a creative tester, I'm sure you all would agree, would lose out on his creativity because you're so bound to the scripts that you're focusing on. So if that's something we're doing as of today, I think now is the time for us to revisit that and say, hey, let me use that script-based approach, but also a little bit of the non-script-based approach. Let me draw that right balance within the time constraints that I'm operating, so I'm able to bring in my extempore creativity as well in my testing efforts. Finally, metrics. I was reading a post recently, just a couple of days back, where someone had written about vanity metrics versus actionable metrics. He calls some the vanity metrics, things that are just going to give you the data but are really not going to mean much. So draw that difference. It's very easy for us to keep carrying forward metrics that we've been using over years, say things such as how many test cases were designed. Is that really going to give us value over a period of time? Or how many test cases did a tester execute? There are better ways for us to really keep track of the progress of a tester or the traceability or the coverage that we've really achieved. So if you're using metrics which we've been carrying forward over years, I think now is the time to revisit that. With that, the second category in terms of what can I give away from my plate but to someone else on my team? This is where the question of that empowerment comes in. We talked about collective ownership. We talked about how do we empower the rest of the team. Yes, the rest of the team understands quality at a high level, but are they really equipped enough? Are they really empowered enough to own quality? So go see if we can talk to a developer saying, hey, how are you actually doing your compilation as of today? How is the build actually coming out to me? Yes, we have the DevOps, we have the continuous integration, but are there tests I can give you for you to do a quick sanity before it comes on to me? So I'm able to save my time not having to debug build issues. You have done this at your end, so it saves time for both of us and also saves reputation for both of us in terms of what our capabilities are. So revisit that. Go talk to our build engineers, see if we can give them some troubleshooting test cases, some sanity test cases that they can run, or say defects that we are filing. Can we give them a small regression suite? Again, I'm not saying we're trying to shun away our responsibility here. I know all these points are very easily said than done. When it comes to implementation, we're going to have all kinds of resistance saying, isn't this your responsibility? How is it all of a sudden coming on my plate? So it is a tricky thing. It's going to take time for us to really work through some of these challenges. But if we're able to keep the management also involved, help the team understand saying, why are we doing this? We're going to be able to win together as a team. If you're able to do this, I think it's really going to go a long way. And also simultaneously, help them understand that I'm giving these to you to empower you, and it also means I'm taking on newer things on my plate. And what are those newer things I'm taking on? Firstly, as a champion of quality, I want to be an ambassador. I want to build a professional culture of testing within the organization, within the developer community, within the build community, within the rest of the product team. I want to build a professional culture of testing. I want to step up. Yes, I'm saying I'm going to take a little bit of the non-scripted approach too. That does not mean I'm shunning away my responsibility. So if you were to come ask me what my test process was, what my thinking process was, I need to be able to step up and say, this is how I did certain things and this is why I did certain things. See if, as of today, what is your quality team's representation in triage meetings? I've seen in most cases, because of want of time or whatever the reason may be, the developer is just doing the triage all by himself, deciding which bugs to fix, which not to fix, and taking them on. If that is happening, now is the time for us to say, hey, as a tester, we are going to have this representation to come sit in triage meetings, and give that opportunity not just to your senior members on your team. Do it on a round-robin basis. Even a junior-most tester gets an opportunity to go sit in a triage meeting, because then he or she really gets the holistic view. What is the impact of this defect from an end-user standpoint? How can I speak up for my bug? It's really helping the tester grow from multiple angles. So take that time to go sit in triage meetings. Take that time to do competitive analysis. I'll just do a simple analysis of what, say, a page load time of a competitor's product is. What is the response time? How is my product comparing with these? So no one is formally asking you to do all of these, but if we are able to voluntarily take these on our plate, I think the value we drive back to the team is going to be so much higher. Come out for these conferences. I think it's a great thing we're all out here. Regardless of the years of experience, regardless of the seniority, it's a great thing that we're all here to network and communicate as a team, saying what's happening in the space of quality. So take these learnings back. These are all, I think, the need of the day in terms of what we as a testing community can take back to the organization. And this is where I come to the thing of, yes, survival is important. But all along, have we been just surviving? If so, isn't now the time for us to really thrive? This was actually a keynote given by a person named Lloyd Rodden, again, a very acclaimed speaker. And it was in fact done as a couple of keynotes in the US this year because it was such a popular session and people kept asking for it over and over again. So he talks about the top 10 lessons for a professional tester to really thrive in the space of quality assurance rather than just survive. And really looking at it, I think most of these we've covered in our earlier discussion. But if I were to bucketize these, first, empower yourself to succeed with the right tools, the right technologies, the right set of people connections that we can make. Empower the rest of the team to succeed in terms of how can I give you some of my tests to help you perform your tasks better. But more importantly, he talks the last 3 or 4 points. He talks about the need to building our own confidence. Unless we believe in ourselves, who else is going to believe in us? So first, believe in ourselves. See what is our differentiator that we can create. A differentiator not for your team, but for yourself as a tester. And work on it in terms of it need not be 5 or 6 areas. Pick one area that you really want to specialize on. Draw that differentiation because right now is that stage where that differentiation plus your overall testing skills together is really going to help us thrive in the marketplace. And how is it going to help? It's going to basically help everyone. It's going to help us create a win-win situation for everyone, for me, for my organization, for my product, as well as for my user base from varied angles. So really think about it saying, this is this one small change that I'm going to start within of empowering the rest of the team on quality, and the effects are just cyclical. It's just going to be phenomenal where that effect will pass on to the team, to the product, and to the overall organization. So that's the overall flow, and as I wrap it up, I do want to bring a small story out here, a story that we all know, we all as kids have listened to the story, have grown up with the story, the hare and the tortoise story. We know how the hare bets the tortoise for a race, calls him for a race, and halfway through the hare gets confident, complacent, whatever you may call it, and takes a nap, whereas the tortoise, which is slow and steady, goes forward and wins the race. Yes, so you may ask me what's new about it. We all know the story. I read recently 3 sequels to the story, which I thought was very interesting and very apt to the discussion also that we're having out here. So sequel number 2, the hare does some soul searching. It says, why did I lose the race? I know what my capabilities are. I know I'm super fast. I know the hare is really slow. Why did I lose the race? Sure enough, I find that I was overconfident, I was complacent, and that's why I lost the race. So it calls the tortoise for the race again, and sure enough, this time around, makes sure it's really fast, goes ahead and wins the race. Moral of the story, slow and steady is good, but if you can be fast and steady, it's even better. So now is the time for us to say, let's be fast and steady. Sequel number 3, time for the tortoise to do some soul searching. I know what my capabilities are. I know every time I will lose to this hare. What can I do? Are there things I can do smartly based on my capabilities where I can still win? And this is where the tortoise says, yes, there are changes in the playing field. Why don't I incorporate those changes in the playing field and see if I can win the race? So it tells the hare, let's do the race again. But you know what? There is a newer playing field. We can reach the finish line faster if we go halfway through land and halfway through water. And the hare does not do any thinking. It says, sure, let's do the race. And the hare wants to be fast and competent this time too. Goes ahead until it reaches all the way to the river. Once it reaches the river, the hare is perplexed. It does not know how to cross the river. Whereas the tortoise, that's slow and steady, comes all the way across, crosses the river, and reaches the finishing line. The message here being, understand what our competencies are. Yes, there may be certain areas where we may be lagging behind, but the playing field is changing. It's not static, it's so dynamic. So now is the time for us to see what those changes are, how we can map them to our capabilities, see if we can draw those synergies, and still be able to win. Now the final sequel is what I really liked. So by now they've become buddies. They've done the race n number of times. So they say together saying, I know what your capabilities are, I know what my capabilities are. Why don't we do the race together one last time and see if it'll be more fun for us to do it together and see if there are better results we can reap. So yes, they do the race one last time. They say all the way on land, the tortoise, I will climb on the hare's back. Let's reach the river. Once we reach the river, the hare will go on the tortoise's back, and together they reach the finishing line much faster. So this time around, they realized that they were much faster together, had a lot more fun doing it together, and really what has happened is they were able to empower each other. I think that's teamwork, which is all about. Teamwork is all about situational leadership. So let's try and understand what situations we are in terms of who needs to be the leader in this situation. Is there something I was doing but this other person is going to be better off doing? If so, let me hand it off to that other person. Let me empower the other person, and together, let's win as a team. So that's the overall message I wanted to bring here to the table today. And with that, in terms of the takeaways, quality continues to be a core attribute. It is going to continue to be a core attribute in the success of a product in the marketplace. So there's no doubt about that. As a tester, now is the time for us to customize our role because the playing fields for quality is changing. But very importantly, yes, I know I'm working on collaboration, but let me not lose my independence because that line is very thin. It's a very blurred line. Earlier this year, I had actually blogged on this on a site called TechWell, talking about the dotted line in role delineation between a developer and a tester. Yes, you want to collaborate, but draw that difference, retain your independence. Finally, win together as a team, and let's remember the newer sequels to the hare and the tortoise story. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajini. Do we have questions?
First of all, great presentation. I like.
Cool. I get a thumbs up. Augmented reality.
Well, I have a question for you.
Sure.
I appreciate the points that you mentioned as a giveaways.
Sorry, as a
giveaways. What I should give.
Sure.
Yeah. I have known a couple of testers. I mean, I'm sure there are many in the industry who really want to get rid of their detailed documentation, scripted way of writing things. They also want to attend conferences, but somehow they don't get required support from maybe their managers, their organizations. I mean, I have met testers who were given answers like, hey, that's just going to be a billing loss for us. Make this test case count from 30 to 300. That's how we are going to get more business. So what would you advise a tester who wants to change things for better, but his every attempt is discouraged?
Very good question. I think this really needs, this mentality change is not just with one person, right? It has to be a buy-in from the entire team. And the entire team, not even just the testing, but cross-board, across the entire organization. So firstly, if that tester is convinced, I'd say be perseverant, stay on it, see how you can communicate, see small ways that you can pick in. and go represent. You need not come out to a conference straight away. I'm telling you, most organizations may not support. I've known of organizations which even have this bar saying, you can attend a conference if you have 3 years of experience, kind of stuff. You know, it doesn't really make sense, but that's something they've been doing all along. So if that is the case, if hopefully you're not in such an organization, if that is the kind of place you are, first start within. See how you can make small changes within your own organization, show it to them on hand, and keep communicating with them as well before you branch off. You know, this may require some extra efforts on your plate outside of your core hours. So if you're a person who's really interested in blogging and writing on test and technical topics, start off small. There could be, say, internal blogs in your organization. So sooner than later, the effort is not going to go waste. It will show up, and when that shows up, it's a change that you've done not just for yourself as a tester, but you've set that precedence for your entire test organization. So stay perseverant and see what small changes you can bring in.
Thank you.
Sure.
So let's assume I'm able to successfully convince my organization that documentation is not required. Down the line, if a resource leaves the company, so what are we going to have for the knowledge base? So that is one question. And the second thing is, if we are going to give away the script-based testing, what are we going to the clients as a form of traceability? Like, how do we ensure that, I mean, I'm totally with you, I'm not against what you have said. I'm just wondering, so if we are going to give away the script-based testing, so how are we going to justify ourselves to the clients saying we are covering the test coverage and also the traceability?
Sure. For your first question, you know, don't get me wrong again. I'm not saying give away documentation completely. I'm just saying look into pieces of it. Like, I'll tell you that same test strategy that I had created. Why did we have to do that mapping at that point of time in the test strategy, saying who is working on which feature, who is the tester going to be working on? So why am I doing that level of resource planning way ahead in the cycle when things are so dynamic? So those are the portions I'm saying where give away your documentation. And you bring a right point about KT. Look for newer ways. You know, are there webinars that can be recorded? Are there training sessions that can be recorded? Because that is going to be more interactive for a new person who comes in rather than reading pages and pages of manuals. So that's the part of, so I'm saying make documentation less of an overhead and also more effective. That is point number one. Point number two, in terms of a script-based approach and how we're going to be able to prove to the client. Firstly, understand what kind of an approach your client has. And the good thing is most clients themselves are beginning to appreciate sort of an exploratory approach as well. And there again, there are multiple ways for you to track it. Say defects that you file, for instance. And if I'm able to map them back as at least high-level test scenarios, that is a way where in an exploratory fashion I found what those defects are. But subsequently for a regression, at least I have a one-liner mapping in terms of traceability. Look at code coverage, for instance. See if you can do code coverage analytics to see how your coverage was, where your traceability lies. All I'm saying is don't be bound by, I've got to run 5,000 test cases. Only then it makes sense in terms of the quality that I have achieved. Make sense?